Okay, hello everybody. We are live on YouTube. Welcome to Sandbox Sunday. We're thrilled to have our good friend and collaborator here, David Crowell. That piece you just heard was Sycamore. It was from an album by an Empyrean Atlas, which is a band that David plays with. We're going to talk a little bit about that, some about his music. We've been kind of doing these for a few weeks now. I'm not sure what episode this is, but we love having these live stream conversations and sharing them with you and getting to hear more about these amazing artists. So, passing off to Johnny.
Yeah, no, I love that track. Actually, that's just like puts me in the right mindset here. Sycamore has always been one of my favorites.
Cool.
But David, I'm reminded of the first time I ever met you in person, which you probably don't remember this because it was like a whole hubbub going on, but it was the Bang on a Can marathon in 2014 in the summer. And I had just moved to New York, and I was like seeing all these famous people, and then I met you, one of those famous people who I looked up to. You probably don't realize that, but I was fanboying pretty hard. And I'm happy now to be past that fanboy stage. I can call you a friend, which is nice.
Of course.
But I am still a fan.
Well, likewise.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, at that point, I'd heard some Empyrean Atlas, and I had heard your piece Celestial Sphere, and Ian's recording of it, and we'll be playing all that for everybody. But there are so many different things that you do so well. You're an instrumentalist and a composer and a producer, and I think all those are apparent on any Empyrean Atlas album. I mean, you produce those and write the music and perform on those albums, right?
Yeah, I didn't do the full production on Inner Circle, the album, but the one after that, and basically all or most of the music that you can hear that's mine, I've produced and mixed, and a lot of times recorded as well. So.
Yeah, like the 21st century musician indeed.
Well, it's fun. I really enjoy it. So it's just cool. You get to spend as much time as you want on making your music and your performers sound as good as possible. So it's great.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something I appreciate how seriously you take it, and any one of those things, whether it's your instrumental playing or composing or producing, you also do all those things like on their own as opposed to like all together. You know, you have music that's on our most recent album, and you also kind of help produce that with the mixing and recording, and you've also got your days playing in the Philip Glass Ensemble. You almost 10 years with that group on woodwinds.
Yeah, mostly saxophone, occasionally flute, but yeah, alto, tenor, soprano, and flute. Yeah, so that was about for 9 years or so.
Wow. And yet, with all of these things, the thing that I keep saying to people whenever I'm like, oh, this is David Crowell, he's from Alaska. For some reason, that always comes to the top of the list for me, that you actually live there. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy.
It's a unique state. You're not crazy.
But so I actually wanted to start off by asking you a little bit about, like, do you think that's had any effect on you? Is it weird that I find this so special and amazing, or do you think it actually does have a tangible effect on you as a person?
First of all, it is special and amazing. It's a wonderful state. I recommend anyone go there. It's got to have had an effect for sure, especially on the piece that we did specifically. I mean, there's obviously like a very specific connection there. But in general, I write a lot of music with this intense rhythmic aspect to it, but then simultaneously there's a lot of really slow kind of meditative stuff, which I think definitely connects to that Alaska experience of space and just like beauty and awe, because like just walking out your front door is kind of a crazy experience. So it's a wonderful place, and I think it affects everyone who lives there. I mean, I can't imagine how it wouldn't. So, yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah, and so that was high school. You spent most of high school in
Yeah,
Alaska.
all of high school, and then my parents are still there, so I'm back and forth a couple of times a year. I spend about like a month or more every year there, and I have for the last 20 years, even when I wasn't living there. So, yeah, I get back. I love it.
And I'll let the other guys jump in here in a second. But I wanted to mention also once more that anybody watching on the YouTube live stream, feel free to post questions or comments in the live chat there to the right of the screen. I don't know if any of you have visited Alaska or have questions about David's music, but we'd love to hear from you. Were you were playing music already at that point in Alaska? Were you writing music too?
Not really. I started as an improviser, really, and um, so I was mostly learning how to improvise. I was really into jazz, and I mean I still am. But that's my true original background is improvised music. So I wasn't really composing, so to speak, but obviously improvisation is some form of composing, just spontaneously. But yeah, I didn't actually start formally writing music till so basically I graduated from Eastman or the last year I was there. I started really getting into it. So I don't know, 22-ish or so, or 23, kind of when maybe kind of late. But yeah, I definitely started mostly as a performer.
And I think there is a really strong connection between improvising and composing. I think they must have like a similar headspace or something, and then it's just whether you decide to write it down or not or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, there are lots of differences, but I think if you start out improvising, it probably gives you the basic sense that, oh, I can make stuff up, or I can develop an idea that I have, in real time, and I think that kind of, there's a lot of connections to actually sitting down and writing something and developing a piece of music that's fully written.
What do you think are some of the bigger differences? I'm curious between having improvised and written. Like, is there something different, like psychologically about it, or just kind of in the practice of it?
I think psychologically it's a lot different. Improvising, especially live, is it just allows you to perform, first of all, and not all composers perform. So that's kind of the first thing is and it's very exciting because you don't know what's going to happen. But then with composing, you have the opportunity to there's a lot more sort of planning and thinking about a very specific thing. I think improvising, there's obviously a ton of practice and thought that goes into it, but it's just a different kind of way of thinking or a different kind of approach to music, where you sort of, you do all your work and then you go out and you just play. Whereas composing, you do all the work and then like that actual thing that you did is performed or something close to it. So I don't know. I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean the two definitely complement each other for sure.
How did you make the leap from one to the other? Like what is the first piece that you say that you wrote? Like how did you jump over that chasm?
Well, at Eastman, like at any music school, you have to do a senior recital. So at the time, it was very uncool to play other people's music for your senior recital. So I just thought, well, I have to start writing something. And I always had, I would always try to think in my mind, like, what does my music sound like if I were to write music? And it was just so hard to put it down. I was so used to a different way of expressing myself, mainly through improvisation. It was a tricky transition for sure, but I was sort of forced into it almost by peer pressure. That being said, didn't feel forced at all. It was actually great. I really enjoyed it, and I think it gave me a chance to think about longer forms and just more actual composing. I mean, I had written music for improvisers, say, like sketches or melodies or maybe chord changes or something like that, where you give it to people and then from there, the group takes it from there, and you figure it out together, which is great. And I still write some music like that. I love doing that as well. Um, but I was intrigued by the challenge really more than anything of just like how do I actually write a 8-minute piece, that's mostly composed or whatever it might be.
So it was a jazz degree at Eastman that you were pursuing?
Yeah, I was in the jazz department, saxophone. Yeah.
Saxophone. Okay, that makes more sense. You were like, it's uncool to play other people's music,
Right,
and I was just like,
well,
it's crazy.
I mean, Eastman at that time was and I'm sure when you went there too, John, it was like a really vital place because Alarm Sound was there on the new music side, and the original Jack Quartet all met there, and So Percussion, I think they formed at Yale, but they also all went to Eastman before that.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of like wonderful new music stuff happening, and I just didn't come from that world, and so I didn't immediately know to even explore it. And then over the time that I was there, I just became more and more interested in that. And yeah,
did you cross over a little bit? And I mean, sometimes it's kind of like there's the jazz camp and the classical camp. And did you feel like you intermingled a bunch, or were you mostly in the jazz world there?
I think I intermingled a bit. Sorry, I mangled that intermingle. Yeah, I think a little bit. It was Eastman, at least then, was a pretty open place. The jazz department was very experimental, and there was a lot of sort of connection or kindred spirit like vibe with what was happening in the new music side as well. So it wasn't that strange to kind of I mean, people had improvising groups that had musicians from all different backgrounds in them performing, and but yeah, it felt pretty fluid actually, which was nice.
David, how much is improvising a part of the music you're writing now? Because I remember the first sketch that we got of music for percussion quartet, the piece that we recorded on our album. I remember there was an improvisation moment in that sketch, and I think we probably did it in a workshop, and it was, I think, quickly thrown out for the four of us. But I'm wondering how much of that is a part of your other.
Well, that wasn't your fault. I'm sure that was me. It really varies. I mean, I have this series of pieces that I've been doing called Plumage, which is basically just myself on all the instruments that I play. And that's all about improvisation, although of course I'm improvising with myself. But I've actually just recently been really inspired by Anthony Braxton and his system of composition and improvisation and how those things work together. So I would say that generally when I'm writing for ensembles, there isn't always a lot or any improvisation. Although there's a little improvisation kind of factored into the newer percussion quartet that you guys got last year, I think. But I'd say there's not a real fluid back and forth with that. But I'm sort of thinking of ways to do that more, depending on whether the group wants to do that. I mean, some people don't want to, which is fine. Right. But I think it would be cool to have sort of a separate stream of music that. I have sort of the composed realm, and then I have music that's kind of in the middle. And Anthony Braxton in particular is just incredibly inspiring figure for that, and his system of integrating improvisation and composition is pretty amazing. I've never really encountered anything quite as great as that in terms of finding a place for those two things to meet.
Yeah, man.
we've got so much great music to share with people today. I almost want to like just dig into it
Sure.
right away, and then we can kind of talk as we go about where that fits into your library. But the first album I know of from you is your David Crowell ensemble album, which is just awesome. I mean, that has things that really remind me of jazz and really remind me of like completely other things, and I'd love to maybe share something off of that album. What do we have ready to go from there, Vic? Maybe Point Reyes or any of the Nectar of Life's?
Yeah, Nectar of Life Part 1. That's a doozy. Short but sweet.
Oh man, yeah, I love that one. I could cue that one up in a second, but maybe we'll listen to something else first.
Yeah, whatever you've got ready to go.
Should we do Great Wide Open?
Yeah, one of my favorite.
Okay.
Dave calls this a deep cut.
Yeah, Sandbox favorite.
Yeah,
Sandbox.
This has not been heard by the public in a while. So.
Hey,
Is there anything you want to tell us about this composition? I actually don't know anything about it except that I discovered it one day and listened to it all the time.
Yeah, it's kind of an ABA. I don't know how technically we want to get. The beginning is kind of an introduction, and then the ending is sort of my favorite part of it. It's when the whole band kicks in and this kind of sort of Balkan-esque like rhythmic thing that happens, which is cool. And then in the middle, there's a big sort of dreamy improvisational section. So get ready to dream, folks.
We better play it, or I'm going to start singing it here. All right, here we go. back here. So that's the A section of Great Wide Open by David Crowell.
Made it to the dreamy spot.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah, we just started dreaming.
started the B section. I was actually, when I was listening to that, I was thinking, and I don't know, sorry if you've already touched on this, Johnny, but your influences with like Afro pop, David, and how that sort of like just like clean electric guitar sound makes it into a lot of your recordings, and how some of the aesthetic is coming from that style of music, kind of like in terms of the sound, like what you see is what you get. I've heard you say that before with the electric guitar sounds in some of your pieces. I was just wondering like what specific like Afro pop kind of stuff has inspired you with some of your music.
Yeah, I don't know if it does in that piece in particular, but maybe it crept its way in there somehow. It's certainly possible.
Maybe
but
more
yeah,
with Empyrean Atlas or something.
definitely with that. Yeah, the clean guitar sounds, just the rhythms above all. Obviously the rhythms are just unbelievable with really great groups. And I was trying to think when it was, but I think it was 2005 or 2006. I saw Thomas Matfumo in Prospect Park, which is just like a mind-blowing experience, and it kind of gave me a sense for the power of his music in particular and other music like it. Just kind of gave me this emotional sense of what polyrhythm can do, when it's really working. But I think polyrhythmic. A lot of my polyrhythmic ideas, have their germination at least with experiencing that live, that very particular concert, and then obviously stuff since then. But yeah, the clean guitar sounds are definitely part of it, and I think you can hear. I think part of the reason, possibly that they usually are clean, although the people play with effects too, but it's just that you can hear the parts so clearly, and that's really important when you have such intensely contrapuntal music like that. You have to hear everything, or it loses some of its effect. So,
David, who are the other people that are playing with you on this album?
It's actually sort of like Empyrean Atlas before it turned into Empyrean Atlas. Not totally though. Jason, the drummer, and I, and then Gray McMurray, who's guitar player I went to school with, and he was on the first Empyrean Atlas record.
Oh, that's awesome.
And then Mike Jabbar on bass, who's not in Empyrean Atlas, but who I used to play with a lot, like specifically at Eastman and kind of the first few years I was in New York. But yeah, it's the same. Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just wondering, this is like the first album released under, and I guess the only album released under the name David Crowell Ensemble, if I'm not mistaken. Did you borrow that in any way from another ensemble you might have played in for several years at that point, the Philip Glass Ensemble, or didn't you think, whatever?
No, I just didn't have a good name. I think, I like, especially in jazz at the time, and this is not a jazz album as you noted, although there is some like Happy Nightmare is very much like
It's close, yeah.
Yeah, but people always put their name in the group, and obviously Steve Reich and Bill Glass did that too. So I think it was probably part of it. It's just like, hey, this is my band. Everyone needs to know. The best way to do that is to put your name in the band titles.
I just want to throw in there for Great Wide Open. I feel like there's something about that tune that lulls me into thinking I am going to be able to predict its motion or its kind of rhythm. The melody almost is predictable, and I think I know what's going to happen, and then you somehow take a turn that's unexpected for me. And no one saw this in the video, but behind the scenes, the five of us, there's this moment like just near the B, just before the B section, where there's this one extra rest, where it's just like there's this tiny little space that is a little bit bigger, and I could see the five of us in that exact moment, like all sort of like, oh, like, it's like, I think it's like a Sandbox favorite moment, just for the, you know, unpredictability of it or something, you know.
Literal beat drop or something like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's like
I mean, I think there's something circular about the melody too, which is something I explore rhythmically a lot, but also melodically.
And the rhythmic structure until that moment, we're only getting one of two possible rhythms, groups of three and groups of two, but you don't know which one. Until that moment, it's either one or the other. And so there's something very reassuring about that, though you don't know if you're going to get A or B. It's like kind of rolling the dice every time almost. But then in that moment, it's like neither.
I love listening to that. That's okay. My point is dumb. I was just going to say I love listening to that song or piece and just like feeling a quarter note the whole way through. And just like trying to like snap a quarter note all the way through that A section gives me a lot of pleasure.
There was a time where we were all sort of like marching around the studio in Brooklyn trying to do that with that tune. You know? Oh, some of it feels really good, and other parts are like, you know, definitely not meant to be out on a quarter note. But
yeah, no, it's a little drifty. It's not totally.
I mean, I know this piece was written a long, long time ago, but to Johnny's point about the unpredictability of the twos and the threes, I mean, do you remember at all what you were thinking about when you wrote this? Like I know some people might try to improvise something like this and then kind of write down what they improvised, and that's the piece. Or did you have like a more methodical way of going through it to make sure that the listener couldn't tell what was going to happen next?
I can't really remember because this one is so old, but I think I think that's something I generally have a big interest in, which is giving something to the people who are listening to it that feels like it could be predictable but never actually is. And I take a lot of joy and pride in doing that. I think I think, I mean, I don't know. I think that's it's kind of just a taste thing I have. It's an aesthetic I have. So if I had to guess, I would say that I probably did that piece in particular more intuitively, just reaching for that kind of unpredictability of it. But at the same time, there is a predictability to it as well, with the twos and the threes, and the melody has certain things that repeat and all that stuff. So, but then putting it in a context where you can't actually figure out what's going to happen next is fun, and something I do, I think, kind of in most of my music to some degree. I don't know if you guys feel that way about the percussion quartet. You play it so many times now, you guys know it so well. There's nothing unpredictable about it for you, but.
No, I mean, I think that's definitely true, especially in the first movement of the percussion quartet, in the way that you juxtapose the different types of things that you write. It's completely unpredictable. It's one of the reasons I think why, at least especially Victor and I in our parts, I don't know if we've memorized those parts yet because, well, maybe Victor has, but I haven't, because it's so unpredictable when the amount of times that you do something, when it goes to the sort of loud, articulate thing, when it goes back to the softer, more sustained thing. I couldn't find the patterns to make it easy to learn in that way.
Yeah, it's actually harder to memorize music that's close to being similar but not actually similar. At a certain point with Empyrean Atlas, I started writing music that was intentionally a little bit easier to memorize, just so that, because we don't use music, and I really wanted to make that a goal for that group in particular. And some of the first pieces, like Eye to Eye, on the first record, is like almost impossible to play from memory. It's so hard. We tried to do it, and like Andrew and I, we have this unison melody that's just incredibly hard to memorize. And so as a result, we didn't play it that much live after a certain point. But yeah, I think the percussion quartet's like that for sure.
The first movement, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
David, we've been talking about Empyrean Atlas a little bit. I wonder, could you, for the people who don't know, could you tell everyone what is Empyrean Atlas and how that got started?
Yeah, so it's a quintet. I play saxophone and guitar, though probably more guitar than saxophone. So it's 3 electric guitars, electric bass, and drums. For the most part, it's very rhythmic stuff, rhythmic cycles, polyrhythms. So yeah, it was kind of a group that formed of the ashes of the David Crowell ensemble to just explore rhythm in a little bit more of a different way than I have been doing with that group. But yeah, there's definitely, as you noted, the Afropop influence of how the guitar parts are bouncing off each other in very particular ways, and so that it was formed to kind of find my own version of that type of music because it made me so happy to listen to that I just felt like if it made me that happy to listen to it, that I should try to get in there and see how I could make something that was my own, that was inspired by that at least. So that's the general purpose of the group.
And the instrumentation comes from where? Because I feel like maybe it's a normal instrumentation, but to me, the 3 electric guitars is pretty atypical, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, I like to write music for multiples of instruments, and I think it's because I like to devalue the idea of a solo voice. I like to really hear the composite rhythm without any part like
hierarchy
sticking out that much. Which is why I was playing saxophone on the first record, and I actually learned guitar after that, so I could play guitar instead of saxophone. Because, yeah, because I one of the tracks on the first record is all guitars, and I'm not playing on it because I didn't play guitar then. But I just love the sound because whenever I listen to, I mean, I like the record, but whenever I listen to it, I'd always be like, the saxophone's too loud. The saxophone's too loud. It wasn't actually too loud. It was just that it was sticking out.
Too much of a saxophone.
Yeah, the timbre was so different that it was. As a listener, you automatically feel that that's the solo voice. So, so the purpose of it was basically to devalue the idea of a solo voice. So that's
really
perfect segue.
Yeah. I was just thinking, because what better way to battle a saxophone than with 5 more saxophones? You know what I'm talking about.
I do. Yep.
Point Reyes.
So this is one of the first pieces that I think Sandbox as a group discovered of your work. Maybe not the very first, but one of the first. And I can just remember Victor coming to the studio one day and just being like, "Guys, I found this piece. I'm in love with it, and I'm going to arrange it for Sandbox." And that was Point Reyes, the original version of Point Reyes that you wrote for yourself.
Yeah, cool. Well, it's on the David Crowell ensemble record.
And well, here, can you just tell us? We all know what it is, but can you tell us what's the instrumentation? What's in this piece?
Yeah, so it's multiple saxophones, 6 saxophones. I mean, I guess it's basically just building on some sort of pocket idea of parts kind of filling in or bouncing off each other in various different ways, and it sounds cool in percussion. So I'm glad Victor. To me, it's like it's such a different sound that it's not a different piece, but it's different enough that it's compelling on its own. You know, cool. It's such a different texture from the saxophone, so it's cool to listen to. I like it.
And had you had never played this piece live? I mean, I know you multi-tracked each of the 6 parts.
No, this was a studio project.
Right.
Yeah.
So the world premiere was actually the percussion version.
Yeah. No, you guys premiered it for sure. Yeah. A few people have asked me to play it with saxophone, but this was so long ago before I made my own recordings that I literally don't have it. I can't give the tracks to anybody to work with, so they would have to re-record it themselves if they wanted to do it.
Right.
That would be
But
cool, though.
We have you guys, so it doesn't matter.
Can we hear some of the original with Dave? We heard him playing guitar on the David Crowell song. Well, I guess he was playing saxophone there too. But let's hear some of the original version.
Yeah, this is Point Reyes from his album. Yeah. Okay, we're back. So that was Point Reyes. I think, should we just go ahead and play our version really quick now too?
Yeah. Well, even before we do Vic, what about this piece made you feel like it was going to be a great piece for Sandbox?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I've been thinking about that a little bit more, and I I was thinking about I mean, we the four of us in Sandbox, we have some conversations sometimes about like our mission and like what music we love to play and like maybe what makes us different from other new music groups, not just percussion groups. And one of the things that I think sometimes gets brought up is music that we love to listen to versus music that we love to play. And are those things ever the same? And for me, listening to Point Reyes for the first time, I think it was Terry actually maybe who found it and showed it to me, and he was like, "Dude, you got to listen to this track, man. This is awesome." And I listened to it, and I just felt like it lived right on that perfect sweet spot where it's like so great to listen to it, but it also like challenges me as a listener because it really there's a lot of like rhythmic counterpoint going on. I think the harmonies are just beautiful, you know, and it's just like this perfect like marriage of these two sides, you know, where music is really fun to listen to, but music also makes me really it like challenges me, you know. And then when we finally arranged it and got to play it ourselves, we realized that it also did that as a player, not just as a listener. You know, there are some complex things about playing that piece. You know, it's a hard piece. It's very
I feel it's very hard. It's like,
yeah. It's
yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I know from making that recording, it's hard. It's a lot harder than it sounds.
absolutely
And
yeah.
you guys are flawless with it, so it's pretty amazing.
Well, it's been fun actually to work on the piece with some students as well. Students have been
Yeah.
playing it, and it's just such a. I mean, it's a fun piece to play, but it also really like puts your rhythmic chops in the gym, you know, because it really stretches that. Should we listen to the two marimba version?
Yeah, A, B, this thing. Let us know in the chat which you think is better. I'm just kidding. Or you can. But...
Okay.
Always a competition with you, Johnny.
All right, here we go. All right, we're back here. So that was the 2 marimba and 4-player version of Point Reyes.
Yeah.
So cool. Yeah. Sorry if the sound isn't so great today. I know that it's not. We got a little buzz. I'm doing what I can to fix it, but yeah, hope it's okay.
A lot of buzz around this stream.
I know.
I mean, the first thing I noticed about that difference is that like the groove is so much different between the two of them, and I wonder. I feel like this was a thing we discussed, David, a little bit. Like when we were playing it, I feel like we were always leaning on the front side of the tempo a little bit on this. And there's something about the groove that you get with the sustain of the saxophone versus the groove that we kind of find when we're playing kind of with these really, really staccato marimba mallets. You know, it feels like something different in there, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's why it's faster too, because the decay is so much quicker.
Yeah.
That it just feels right to play it faster. I think if I played it that fast on saxophone, it might not sound that good. So I think it's very instrument specific. I think if you played it at the tempo that I played it, it would sound too slow. So I like the tempo. I think especially with the decay of the marimba, it's necessary.
I mean, I love this arrangement that Victor did because I think it's such a great piece to choose for something like this because it shows that it can support like these different types of sounds. Like your version of it on the saxophones is so sustained and the attacks are so much smoother versus ours, which are very, very sharp, right? Every single note, it's very, very rhythmic in that completely different way. It makes me feel a different thing when I hear this version of it. And I don't think that's true for every single piece that's ever been written. So I think it was such a good choice in that regard.
Yes, thank you, Victor.
Thanks for the music.
And so when someone comes up to you, David, and they're just absolutely obsessed with a piece of yours, like we've probably done a few times, does that almost feel weird to you? Like,
No.
This is mine, or is it like you're just like glad that they like it as much as you do? Like, what is that sensation like?
I'm happy when anybody knows about my music. So yeah, it's joy is the
Okay.
yeah.
So we haven't freaked you out or anything with
No. And I think like not all my music, but a lot of my music is transportable between instrumentations because it's so contrapuntal. I mean, it's really. There are pieces that are more about texture, which you definitely need the actual instruments that they were written for. But there are some like Point Reyes where it's just a different thing, but it's not worse or better, or it's just the same music is there and being performed just with a completely different sound. I think it works.
Yeah,
It'd be interesting to know like what else you could play this piece on. Maybe there are other instruments.
Electric guitars.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I love what you were saying about how it's just kind of contrapuntal. There's almost no melody. Well, it's like everything is melody and everything is like harmony, like all at the same time. It's just like kind of all in your face, like all melody and like everybody is like contributing kind of equally to this sort of like global composite. I think that's something I hear a lot in your music and something that I really love because it just like sets up this texture where it sort of like feels very familiar, but then at the same time you're like, well, what is that? That's like, it sounds sort of like very different to me. You know, it's not like minimalism. It's not the same as like Reich, you know, where it's just like looping something, but it's also not like a song where there's like a melody and there's like a bass, you know. It all kind of like gets jumbled together, which I really like.
Yeah, I think that piece in particular was probably very influenced by Reich.
Yeah.
Because it's an older piece, and I mean, I still love Reich, but he was like my hero there for a minute.
Right.
So I think some of that earlier music is definitely influenced, but it also functions a lot differently as you know, because his music's it's a lot about cells repeating until it's time to move on, and it's organized a lot differently.
Yeah. Well, should we pivot to the percussion quartet?
Sure.
And the record?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the magnum opus, the big sort of big percussion quartet piece that David has written for us is called Music for Percussion Quartet, which we released on our album a few months ago called And That One Too. And it's in 4 movements. It's a mallet quartet, kind of. It's kind of a quintet, although there's just 4 of us. The first movement is glockenspiel, marimba, and 2 vibes. And
Johnny
then
has double duty.
Johnny has double duty, yeah. Well, I play vibraphone and glockenspiel.
Oh, right. No, but he has to play marimba and drums at the same time, or kick drum, bass drum.
Oh. Okay. I don't want to take away from that, sorry.
Yeah.
But before we talk about that our kind of our beginnings of that were Celestial Sphere, I guess, right, Ian?
Yeah, right. So actually, if we go back in time a little before we discovered Point Reyes, even though it's a much earlier piece, I wanted to ask you a little bit, David, about how you and I first met, which was around this piece that actually a few people in Sandbox helped be a part of the consortium to have you write.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I was introduced to you, David, first by our mutual friend Lindsay Kesselman.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that yesterday, the other day. Yeah.
Played soprano. She was in the cast of Einstein on the Beach, which is the Philip Glass opera that, of course, you were in the Philip Glass Ensemble. You were performing on this worldwide tour for many years, right? It was like a multi-year tour.
Yeah, 3 years, something like that.
Yeah. And I remember I got to see it when you guys were in Brooklyn. You guys played the BAM. And I think right around that time, while you guys were in town, that Lindsay was telling me about you. She sent me this album of percussion music that you had written, I think for or in collaboration with Brian Arkinall.
Yeah, that was Eucalyptus, which Point Reyes is actually on that album too.
Right.
But yeah, Brian and I met at Bang on a Can Festival in 2007, and yeah, we did a number of pieces, like some that no one's ever heard that I have recordings of somewhere, and then those 2 that actually made it onto that record. But
yeah, I mean, I just remember being so blown away by the work on that CD, and I don't even think I was talking about asking you to write a new piece at this point. I think the first thing I asked you when we got together for coffee that first time was, can I play any of these pieces? Like, what do the scores look like? How does one play them? And I feel like your response to me was like, well, I actually can't. Like, I didn't think these pieces to be live pieces, right?
Yeah. That was another studio project for sure. I think Kaleidoscope, I honestly don't even remember how many parts there are, but there's a lot. So yeah, I mean, technically we probably could have figured out a way to do it, but I'm not sure. I mean, I'm glad that we didn't. I'm glad that we ended up working on a new piece together, because of which there's actually also a large ensemble arrangement of, even though it's another piece for kind of multiple marimbas. There's ended up being a very large ensemble arrangement of. So,
that's right.
But yeah,
you told me that I couldn't play any of those other pieces. We started talking about a new piece, but I love the type of sound and the type of writing that you had in these pieces. So I asked if you could write something like that. Like, I think both of us were inspired by some of the counterpoint Steve Reich pieces, which feature one instrument with many multi-track layers of that same instrument kind of playing, like the Point Reyes style. So I asked you to kind of do something like that, which is what you did to great effect.
Yeah, it was fun, and we recorded the whole thing together. And
man, that was a pretty DIY project. I mean,
it was. Yeah.
Like, the piece is in 2 big sections. The first section has a lot of layers, and in this really cool effect where you have the person playing a thing, like a couple chords or whatever, at one tempo, let's say quarter equals 90, and then you have the same exact part played at like 88 and 92 and 89 and all these other tempos that are just around the 90, and it creates this kaleidoscope. It's really amazing thing. But I don't even know how many different layers. But all I remember is that this was so long ago that Sandbox didn't even have a studio. So we recorded it in my living room. Like, you brought.
Well, we recorded the first part in your living room, and then we recorded the second part at Lawson's studio. But he didn't having to do with recording. Do you remember this? He didn't actually help us.
He rented his studio. He this out a little bit, but he did. You recorded, you engineered, mixed, and edited the entire thing.
Right. Yeah, I did. Yeah. that was one of the first projects I did like that, actually. Yeah, but it was fun. I do remember the living room session.
I guess it worked for that first part of the piece because there were so many layers. So any like sirens going by and stuff like that, you couldn't hear them in the final.
Well, I don't remember if we had the idea that this would be a studio recording or not. It was more just we had to record it because that's how you play the piece.
This was such an interesting part of the process for me that I never considered. When you wrote the piece, you didn't actually write the live part at all in the beginning. You just wrote the piece, and you wrote all the different parts that had to come together to make the piece, and we recorded every single part.
Every single one. Yeah.
We had a recording of the whole piece, and then I was like, wait a minute, I need something to play live, right?
Right, yeah. Well, maybe we did conceive of it as a recording from the beginning. I can't totally remember, but...
I don't think as a studio recording. I don't think we were planning on that yet. But then I remember I asked you, like, what should I play live? And you were like, what do you want to play live? And I think I kind of chose, like, the parts that I really enjoyed playing, and that formed the beginning of the live part.
Yeah, and we performed that at New York Fashion Week. Do you remember that?
Yeah, wow.
That was fun. I enjoyed that.
All I remember, so David and I collaborated with...
The interface broke, I remember that.
That's the only thing I remember. We collaborated with our friend Mark DiChiazza, who is a filmmaker and director that Sandbox has worked with, an amazing guy. And he had this big designing a show for Fashion Week.
Yeah.
Where the name of the company was Pas de Calais.
Yep.
So we went down to this little place in Soho. We set up, and I played Celestial Sphere, and I also played... What was the other piece of yours that I played on?
I had a couple other ambient guitar pieces. They were really into that kind of vibe. They wanted to set this atmosphere. So I think somehow you just basically improvised with those.
I think so, yeah.
As I recall, but
yeah.
It was a strange experience. But also a very memorable one.
No, it was really fun. Like, these people be walking out on the way, like, showing off the clothes. I'm, like, playing some beer and stuff. Yeah. Cool. But all I remember is that we had a sound check the day before. Everything's great.
Yeah.
And we were using this old Motu interface. I don't know if people are familiar with them, but it was a FireWire interface. This gets super technical. It's stupid. But old FireWire devices like that, you can only plug them in one orientation, like right side up or wrong way up. And if you plug it in the wrong way up, it's not going to like stop you. It's not like a normal port where it just wouldn't fit. It fits, but it breaks the device. To the wrong side and breaks the device. It's crazy.
Yeah.
It shouldn't let you do that.
David and I show up the morning. We did all the sound check. Everything was great. So we show up like an hour before the show. And the sound guy comes up to me, and he's like, hey, man, your interface isn't working. I'm like, oh, that's weird. Like, it was working great yesterday. And there's like this one little light that's just blinking on the interface. That's the only thing that's happening.
It's never a good sign.
I'm Googling this thing. Like, why is this happening? And like, it tells me that this is happening because someone plugged it in backwards. So I go up to it, and I'm like, did you possibly plug in the FireWire cable backwards? Like, no. Like, well... Now the interface is broken. I think, did we like send him to a store? I can't remember how we got out of it.
We got out of it where you basically just didn't use the interface.
Oh, wait. This is... Okay, so I played it without a click track, and this is often I now play Celestial Sphere without a click track. So you only need a click track for the first half of Celestial Sphere because it has that thing I was just telling you where there's lots of different layered things where the tempo is just off.
Yeah.
So I think you told me, you were like, just try it without a click. It'll be fine.
It's fine. Yeah, it's more about feeling your way through it, and there's a certain effect that it has, which you can, more or less do without hearing. I think it's probably more pleasurable to do it without like hearing the check in the ear. So
and you don't even need the interface. So like I play this piece, like I'll do a clinic or something like that for a percussion studio, and I don't have my whole setup. So I'll just have my phone where I have the playback track, and I just plug it into the speaker, and then you can play the whole thing, sort of. So that was, I guess, kind of a trial by fire, kind of figuring out that it was possible.
Yeah, you were stressed. I remember that.
We should listen to it.
Let's listen to a bit. Yeah.
So this is a video. Vic, are we going to play the video or just the audio?
Video.
Video. So this is the video that we made with Michael McQuilkin, who some of the folks who are watching the stream might remember from a few weeks ago. He's the filmmaker and the director that Sandbox is working on Andy Akiho's Seven Pillars piece. He's an amazing filmmaker, and we kept the apartment vibe going, so we filmed this whole thing in his apartment out in Bushwick.
All right, give me just a second to cue this up.
Years after, David, you and I did the audio.
I know, yeah.
I had been playing the solo part for years at this point, but to make this video, I had to learn how to play all of the other parts again, which were so many more parts than I remembered, and it was so hard to remember which one I was playing in the moment, because they're all like exactly the same, except, off by a 16th note or off by an 8th note or something like that.
Yeah.
It was quite a process.
All right.
Yeah, it's a beautiful video.
Vic, are you starting from the beginning, or?
It's actually not queued up yet, so just give me 1 second. Yeah.
Spot 2, Ian.
Sorry, they didn't hear what you just said because I had to turn the fader down. So maybe just say it again.
Oh,
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah, no, my favorite spot is 6:41 to 7:28, and it's in that second half.
Is that letter C?
I've actually never played the piece. What do you think, Ian?
I think it's
when that bass line comes in, boom, 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 boom.
Oh, that's letter D. Yeah.
It just gets ultra groovy.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was just going to quickly say, Ian, when you were putting the consortium together to fund this piece, you asked a bunch of us, and I think you shared his music with us, and I'd never heard your music before, David, and I think that was right around the moment when we were driving from New Haven to New York a bunch, and I think then we subsequently got super obsessed with those earlier albums of yours, David's, and I think that's when we were listening to a bunch of your early music in those drives. I think that was probably the discovery of Point Reyes for us. It was probably through that consortium, which is pretty cool.
Very cool. Yeah, thank you for jamming.
All right. Should we hear it? I'm ready.
Let's do it.
David, I just love your music, man.
Oh, thanks. I think that was letter B. Now that I heard it, your jam is letter B, Johnny.
There's something. I don't even know what meter it's in. It's not something regular. I know that much, but I know it makes me want to dance. And the fact that I don't know the meter actually encourages me to just dance however my heart desires. It's like, it's all right, man. Like, who knows where the downbeat is? I don't care. Like,
Let's see it, Johnny.
Even know any of these things are even when playing it. It's like memorizing, like Great Wide Open. It's just a series of 2s and 3s, and you just kind of know what that is. But the meters are really like. This is an example of a piece where like you had to notate it in some way, but when you look at it on the page, it looks kind of complicated. But when you just hear it, it doesn't. Or when you're actually playing it, it's not that complicated. But it's all these 15, 16s and 11, 16s.
Yeah. Well, I think it's the problem with notating essentially circular rhythm. You know, it's like, how do you decide what goes over the bar line or where you put the bar lines, and it's actually irrelevant to how you hear it, but it's, you know, obviously if someone's going to play it, you have to organize it in some way, which is something even today, like in a lot of my music, I have to spend some time thinking about, like, how do I actually most clearly notate this? It doesn't always mean that much really in the end, for some of these pieces, but you have to put it on paper in a way that's clear. I don't know if that section was clear. There might have been a clearer way to do it. I know that you renotated a few of the things.
I think I had. Well, you changed some of the. You had one way of doing the groupings, and I had a different way. And I think you changed it maybe to my way. But then I think you also invite people to leave it up to them, because like I group it in a certain way, and the music, the stresses of the music, are based on that grouping. And that is not the only way to do it. Like another performer could have a completely different way of feeling those rhythms, and as long as they play it in time, it would sound great. It would just sound different than this, you know.
Yeah, I was just talking about this to someone the other day about how important or not important it is to the actual experience of listening to my music or some another composer who writes music, you know, with some similar ideas as to how the performer really is feeling it, or, you know, if they think of an easier way to do it. Is that bad for the piece, or does it actually make it sound significantly different? I think is the more important question. I don't know. Sometimes I'm convinced that it does, and sometimes I'm convinced that it doesn't matter. But
I know it's a really good question. For me, as I was learning this piece, it was necessary. The way I figured out what groupings I was going to use were kind of like, what could I understand, like in my head? What could I subdivide in my head that would result in me playing the rhythms correctly? Like I was trying to learn this really quickly. We were recording it like very soon after you wrote it, and right. I just had to learn how to play the 16th notes perfectly in time. And so I figured out where to put the stresses so that my body played them in time. Like,
and also, I just want to say for the folks out there that there is hardly any editing, if any editing, on this performance. I mean, Ian was just like destroying it. So whatever you came up with, it was working.
I feel like it's like a cool thing to think about in general. You know, like I think bar lines, like conceptually, sometimes are super important in music, and sometimes, like you're saying, like they're just a means to getting it to sound the way you want it to be heard. You know, the bar lines themselves aren't necessary, but you have to figure out a way to write it down. I think there are definitely other composers where the meter they choose is like this really important thing, and that's actually going to tell the performer something about the way to play it. You know.
Yeah, I've tried to get more specific about those things in the last couple of years, to be a little bit, I don't know, I used to think that it didn't really matter that much, and now I think that it does matter a little more, so I put some more thought into really considering all the options that are available, whereas before I felt that notation was so inadequate at its core for expressing the music as it should be heard, that I didn't really think one was better than another. And I've kind of been rethinking that idea more recently and trying to be more specific with notation in some ways. So, but yeah, it's completely up for debate, and I love music like that. I mean, like going back to Matt Fumo, I mean, was one of the great things about hearing him is like, you can listen to any musician on stage exclusively for a while and feel the music in a completely different way than if you were like listening more closely to another musician on the stage. It was just this like beautiful, flexible thing that you can just kind of breathe depending on how people are interacting in the moment. So I think that's the spirit with which a lot of this stuff is done. And so sometimes it does feel like the notation of it really isn't all that important. And I think that was the case for Celestial Sphere.
Well, that just, I mean, it reminds me a lot of the new quartet that I think we were maybe going to talk about at some point, maybe not, but I feel like I remember those meters being kind of way in that zone, where like if I heard it, I would never be able to guess the time signature that things were happening in. Maybe that makes sense to you, but I remember like when we were going through this new piece, it was like very hard to predict in that sense for me. But
I know it's going a little out of order, but could we actually, we have some music live with audio and with the score queued up. Could we actually just show a little bit of that? Maybe either Point Cloud or Luna? I don't know what we've got there.
Yeah, what do you think, David?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to play maybe this, well, actually, I definitely, we should play Luna at some point. But the notation for Point Cloud is very interesting. So
it is
more to this specific discussion.
I think it'd be cool. I also want to hear it again.
Okay.
So pretty. Could you tell us a little bit about the piece?
Yeah. Well, you're going to hear the second movement. It's not out yet. It's going to come out on Dan Lapel's record sometime, hopefully soon. Our situation is, delaying that as it is delaying everything. But yeah, so this, I mean, the first part of this piece is basically actually very similar to the new percussion quartet. I got the idea from writing this piece, which is that there are a couple different sections which are chopped up in various different ways. So I basically, this entire piece I played completely before I notated anything. And in this particular case, for this movement, I found two loops that I really liked just by playing, and then I edited everything. I think you'll hear it. There's kind of a stiltedness to it in how the sections and the measures kind of relate to each other. And so that's the first half of the piece is, and it's notated the way it is because I literally had no idea what time signature was in until I actually put it down on paper. It was completely irrelevant. But it also felt strange to not show the phrasing of the lines, and so you see a lot of lines phrasing over bar lines in kind of peculiar ways until you actually hear it and you realize that that's what the spirit of it is. And I did have a lot of discussions with Dan, like, is this too confusing? I mean, I don't have to do it this way. And he's like, no, I see what you're going for, and I think once I get used to it, it'll actually help the performance of it. So
amazing. Then this might be the next Sandbox arrangement. We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, this is Point Cloud. So beautiful, David.
That is a great piece. So is that the second movement of that piece then?
Yeah, that's the second.
And how long is the whole work?
The whole thing is 12 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, Dan sounds really good on that. Really good.
Right.
He does.
I know you talked a little bit about this, but I wanted to ask again, like, how do you come up with the whole composite of everything that is happening? Like, do you envision that at once, or do you write one of the parts and then you write another part along with it?
Sometimes I do exactly that. The way I recorded this was I did a rough demo of it to compose, basically. So I came up with one line on the guitar, recorded it, and then came up with all the subsequent lines just purely from playing, and just trying to feel whatever rhythm was interesting. And that's why you have all those, lines that are happening like a half beat apart, was all just intuitive, kind of. I mean, it was just through playing. And then after that, it got very detailed once I had my basic loops, because you can kind of hear that it's moving between two basic sections, but every time the section is varied in a particular way, which has to do with like a pretty extensive process of editing little bits of those loops and then sticking them together in ways that I was interested in. So that's the first half of the piece anyway, was composed that way. And the second half actually very similar process of just playing and just kind of piecing things together through editing. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's really fascinating.
It's a fun way I can't always compose that way. You know, sometimes I can't always play to compose,
Right.
based on the situation. But in that particular case, I knew that I could do that. And so it was a really fun experience. It was really a pain to write everything down. After I got through the whole thing, I was like, I know the piece is done. I like it. And now I have to actually put it on paper. And it took me hours and hours and hours. I mean, it just took me forever.
And that's when you're deciding on meters and on bars.
Yeah, how do I put this? Yeah, how do I put it together that makes sense? Like the whole debate I had with myself about how to beam things, like over the bar lines that you see, and like, is that too confusing, or all this stuff. It's something I never considered when I was actually playing it. It wasn't part of the process of creating the music itself. It's really just the process of putting it on the paper after.
Yeah, structuring it.
Yeah.
Well,
Super interesting. I mean, it does remind me a little bit of what we listened to, however, almost an hour ago now, but The Great Wide Open with these groups of three and stuff like that. The whole opening is based on these, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but you've chosen to put it just like we did with Great Wide Open over that quarter note. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, which is like already like gives us a little inkling. I mean, I think you probably do that because that is the broader structure of it. But again, these decisions that we're talking about of, should you just keep writing that as the pulse or give it a different pulse, or who knows? But
yeah, well, I mean, that was the basic pulse for the piece until I started editing it, and then then it becomes very, as you can hear, tilted is the wrong word because that sounds like it's a bad thing, but it's kind of cut up, I guess. It's sort of chopped up in various ways, and then the pulse completely changes, because that's how I turned the sort of predictable thing of that pulse into an unpredictable thing. So it feels like you sort of understand what's happening, but it's actually, you don't really know what meter it's in, like what we were talking about with some of the other stuff too.
Well, should we talk about this piece that you wrote for Sandbox several years ago now?
Yeah.
That has been a huge part of our repertoire for all of these years. It's a big piece. It's like, I don't know, 16 minutes long or so in 4 sections. And I think the impetus behind the piece is so interesting. What you told us about what you were inspired by as you were writing the piece. And I would love to hear you talk a little bit now about all of that.
Yeah, so I mean, the basic idea is that there are four movements. Two of them are really fast and rhythmically crazy, and the other two are very still and lyrical, and it's all bowing on the mallet instruments. So, yeah, the first and the third, just the very nature of polyrhythms, meaning that you're kind of moving at your own speed, but also you're also still very much connected to the other different speeds that other people are moving at as well. So you're very independent, and yet you're also completely beholden to the sort of the group's pulse of how the music operates. And in this case, I sort of saw kind of an analogy to walking around New York City, where it's like people are just. I mean, I'm a slow walker in New York City, which is really a problem for people. I know people automatically hate me right now just for saying that. But there is a sense that like you're that everyone really has their own idea of how things should be going, and sometimes they're very happy to let you know the ways they think that things should be going. So this is kind of something like that, where it's like you have your slow walker, you have your fast walker, you have like your car, you have your bike, or whatever the case might be, and it's kind of all coming together. And yet it in order to avoid tragedy, you have to give in somewhat to what other people feel that the tempo should be. And so I don't know. I saw that kind of analogy in the polyrhythmic nature of the music.
I love the idea of there being like some kind of controlled chaos to the first and third movements, somewhat in this, because there are like these crazy like overlaid polyrhythms, but we still do have like a pulse, that we're all following, that we all agree on, which maybe is like you could make that connection to the city, living in the city. There is like craziness and chaos, but there is like some like rhythm to it.
There's an order. There's an order to things, despite. And I think you see that more when you live there a long time. Like you kind of get a sense for like how things work and how people want to live in the city. But everyone does have their own idea. And then the slow movements are just like climbing mountains, basically. That's what it is. Just feeling the space of that, looking out onto the landscape, which is one of the names of the fourth movement. So yeah, just completely relaxed and enjoying your surroundings. Although I do enjoy the New York kind of surrounding at times as well. So, but kind of luxuriating in the spaciousness of being able to breathe deeply and sort of move at your own pace.
Mm-hmm. Definitely, yeah. Well, should we hear a bit of it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Do we want to hear some of the first movement, third movement?
Let's start with the first movement then.
Okay. We'll play a little bit of the video that we have on our YouTube channel.
This is a live performance, right?
Yes, yeah, this is. Is that okay? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, we're back here.
Sounding
So-
good, guys.
Thanks. So that was actually, we were talking a little bit about some of those patterns earlier, about memorizing that, how it's like kind of almost a pattern. That's that movement, particularly
Yeah.
with those fives. You know, like there are a lot of like chunks that repeat, but then like there'll be one bar that's different here, one bar that's different there. Makes it a little bit tricky, but yeah. So to kind of like do the yin and the yang. So we heard like the city movement. Should we hear maybe the landscape movement?
Sure. Yeah.
This is from our album, and what I love about this, well, one of the things I love about this recording of this movement is that David actually joins us on it. David mixed this recording of his piece on the album, and during that process, he just wrote us one day, and he was like, "Guys, I had this idea. I was just listening to it, and I improvised a little bit on the guitar while it was playing. What do you think?" And he added this whole other layer to the piece that we knew so well. And it kind of made us feel like we should never ever play the piece without him.
Not true, but it was still yeah. And we played it. I performed it with you at Sawdust at the end of February for your release show, which was
It was
super.
one of the last shows we got to play.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm glad we got to do it.
That was cool.
And
Okay, so we'll hear some of the fourth movement. It's so beautiful. Just a little side note, actually, because I was remembering when I was listening to that was when we recorded it with Lawson, we recorded bowing the mallet instruments, so we could get like a lot of resonance. But then we actually overdubbed recording just the bow, just the sound of the bow, with the microphones levels turned way up. And then that's just kind of overdubbed over top of it, and that's what gives you kind of that like that sound, like there's like this big giant just like exhaling the entire time. It's actually like the bow that's being recorded, just the sound of the hairs being recorded with the mics really hot. It's such a cool little touch.
It was like one of those like 3 a.m, everyone wants to go home, and Lawson was like, "Wait,
I have an idea." Yeah.
so cool. Let's do this. And it really was nice.
Yeah, very nice. Cool.
Well,
and
no, sorry, Johnny, go ahead.
well, the one tidbit that came to mind when David, you were talking about how you love both these things equally. You know, you like the city and the hustle and bustle and the structure, but you also love the outdoors. I mean, I feel the same way about movements 1 and 3 versus 2 and 4. Like, they couldn't be more different in terms of their kind of atmosphere and aesthetic, but I love both. You know, I really love both for what they are, and I would never I would never want just one of those things. So I feel like you really nailed it there.
Yeah, I have a similar feeling. It's like if you get out into the wilderness, you start to get a little itchy to go to, like, some great concert in New York City or something, and it's just the nature of the beast. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, I wish it were a little easier to do nature stuff in New York, but you can. There's Harriman. You ever been to Harriman? It's a good park. But yeah, no, I totally agree. It's they need each other.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if anyone wants to listen to more of that piece, it's on our album, and that one too, which you can check out on Spotify.
The album as a whole is wonderful, and this sounds beautiful. And
thanks.
Yeah, congratulations again. I've told you many times.
You had a lot to do with that. You spent many hours on that track.
Mixing it, yeah.
Yeah, well, gladly, happily and gladly.
Yeah.
So maybe in our last segment here, we are kind of curious, what are you up to now? I know you've had some new recent releases, and the music is still flowing, it seems. So I'd love to hear kind of how you're.
The music goes on for sure. Yeah, I just released a piece I did with my quarantine partner, Eva Castellanos, and that's Luna. So we recorded this in her living room, basically, similar, Ian, to what we did all those years ago. But it came out really well. I'm very proud of it. She sounds amazing. But maybe we can listen to a little of that at some point. But yeah, other than that, I am kind of in the middle of a piece for the Icarus Quartet. I know you know those guys well.
Totally.
I'm working on some more saxophone improv-y music, kind of referencing some of the Rex and stuff we talked about way at the beginning. Those are the two main things. I'm going to be writing a double guitar concerto for Dan Lapel and Andrew Smiley. So that should be fun. That's my summer project. Lots of stuff. Always something to do.
That's amazing. Yeah. Do you want to? Should we play some of Luna?
Yeah, it'd be great. Maybe play the second. I don't know how much time you have, but maybe the second movement.
Yeah, we'll play. Let's play a bit of the second movement. Cool. That was Luna. I know we're coming down to the last couple minutes here. We got to wrap up. But, David, I was just wondering how you feel like your compositional style has changed over the past few years. Like, because that sounds different to me than a lot of the music that I've heard by you. And I'm just curious what you think about how your voice has sort of progressed over time.
Yeah, well, that piece has a very specific purpose, which is to kind of bring together sort of Baroque kind of contrapuntal sense with some of the minimalist stuff that you guys probably know me a little more for, or I know that we all five of us enjoy very much. So it's kind of a marriage of those two worlds. And the first movement is actually for solo cello, which I've never really written solo music in its truest sense. I mean, Celestial Sphere is one performer, but of course there's many parts. So I had it was a challenge for me to think in terms of creating something just for solo instrument, because my music generally is so contrapuntal and relies on at least 2 or 3 parts. But yeah, just always trying to challenge myself to do some different things, try some new things. Just like a lot more harmonic movement. I think it's basically what you're hearing, like in conjunction with some of the similar rhythmic ideas that are even in the percussion quartet. So yeah, kind of a marriage of those two things.
That's really cool. Well, I guess we should wrap up here now. Thanks so much, David, for hanging with us for this past couple hours or so.
Yeah,
yeah, absolutely. We're
clap. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, yeah.
Great to see you, man. Like,
yeah, you too.
You could be hanging in person, but this is the next best thing.
We will eventually.
Totally. So next week we are doing Sandbox Sunday again with composer Jason Truding. So anyone who's listening now, if you want to check out that segment, next week Sunday at same time, 3:00, we'll be streaming with Jason Truding.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So thanks so much for being here, David. Thanks everyone for watching. We'll roll our outro, which is Green Arrow, which is by David and played by Empyrean Atlas. So thanks everyone and have a good day.
Thank you.